Hi, this is Aaron Newcomb filling in for Randall Schwartz again on Floss Weekly. This week, Dan Lynch joins me to talk about the demise of all sorts of open source software, including Mono, OpenOffice, or now LibreOffice, and Skype. You're going to want to find out about these important software applications right now on Floss Weekly.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Floss Weekly is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Floss Weekly with Aaron Newcomb and Dan Lynch, episode 165, recorded on May 11th, 2011, The Demise of Floss. This episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Netflix. Watch thousands of TV episodes and movies streamed to your PC, Mac, or TV instantly. Plus, get DVDs by mail in about a business day. For your free 30-day trial, go to netflix.com/twit. All right, welcome to Floss Weekly. Again, I am not Randall Schwartz. I'm still not Randall Schwartz. He's still away traveling, and so I'm filling in for him again. And presenting with me today is Dan Lynch. Dan, are you there?
Hi, I'm here.
Ta-da!
I'm not Randall Schwartz either, just for the record. It seems to be a current thing now. You have to declare that you're not Randall Schwartz before you can say anything.
Well, you know, I just want to make sure it's clear for those that are listening to the audio. You know, we sound an awful lot alike. Sometimes I do sound like Kermit the Frog, so just gotta be careful. Make sure people know who's talking here. On today's show, we've got something very special for you guys. We're actually going to chat about some things that are going on in open source in lieu of having a guest today. We're going to go ahead and take some of the most current topics and chat back and forth, maybe take some questions from the chat room as well as we're going along, so we'll do that. But before we begin, anything going on in your world, Mr. Lynch? Anything interesting that you want to comment on?
Lots of things. Open source wise, I suppose. I've been playing with the new Ubuntu release that came out a couple of weeks ago, 11.04, and they've now shifted away from GNOME to the new Unity desktop, which is the Unity interface, which is slightly different. So I've actually got a netbook running it here, so I might be able to give you I don't know if you'll be able to see my screen very well, but I could try and give you a bit of a demo of that later. So I'm trying to get to grips with that and maybe take a look. I haven't looked at GNOME 3 yet, but I'm interested in that because they're really shaking up the Linux desktop. It's gonna either make a lot of people very happy or a lot of people very mad. I think time will tell on that.
Well, I definitely want to talk about a few things that are going on as well in terms of my employer, Oracle. We'll talk a little bit about some of the things that they're doing as well. And I do want to remind everybody real quickly that I will be coming to Maker Faire. So if you're in the Bay Area and you want to head over to Maker Faire, I'll be there with my camera and my audio gear. I'll be doing some podcasts from there. So that's what's going to be coming up for me here in the next couple of weeks. Coming up May 21st, I believe, 21st and 22nd, Saturday and Sunday here in the Bay Area, San Mateo to be exact. So that's what's going on here. Now, before we jump into our episode today, we have an ad, and we're going to be talking today about Netflix. So Netflix delivers movies directly to your home, saves you time, money, and hassle, of course. And you can watch instantly thousands of TV episodes and movies streamed directly to your PC or Mac, which is great. Or also stream to your TV via Netflix Ready device. Since I run primarily a Linux household, that's how I get my Netflix, is I just turn on my Blu-ray player and stream Netflix episodes through the Blu-ray player or through my Wii directly to my TV. You can also run Netflix on Xbox 360 or PS3, and you can get DVDs by mail in about one business day. Netflix has really revolutionized the delivery mechanism for mail through their many distribution centers and so forth. So they really get DVDs to you very, very quickly. You can watch as many movies as you want, anytime you want. There's never any late fees. There's never any dues. There's never any due dates, I should say. Today, I wanted to focus on some of the... I'm pretty big nostalgic for 80s stuff, and I've got to say I've got lots of 80s TV shows mostly in my queue. So, for example, The Incredible Hulk is available for instant streaming, as well as I have Airwolf in my queue. Battlestar Galactica, the original series. If you're a fan of the new series, if you've watched it and haven't seen the original Battlestar Galactica, I highly recommend getting it on Netflix instant streaming and checking that out, because it really is a good one. Buck Rogers in the 25th Century is in my instant queue, as well as the A-Team and V, the miniseries. I could go on and on, but I got to save some for the next time we run this ad. So, but all those 80s, really cool 80s shows, a lot of them are on Netflix, and you can go check those out. And I highly recommend that you do. When you register for Netflix, when you go to Netflix to register, you can get a free trial membership just by going to netflix.com/twit. Be sure to sign up for your free trial at netflix.com/twit. And we thank Netflix for their support of Twit and Floss Weekly. Very exciting. Okay, let's get into our episode today. So what do you want to talk about first, Dan?
Well, since you mentioned great 80s TV, I was wanting to talk about that, but no, I think that's not really why we're here. I was ashamed. I was worried you didn't mention Magnum PI there, but anyway.
Oh, you know what? That actually was available. Now that we're out of the ad, that was available for instant, and they took it off, and now you can just get the DVDs. In fact, I watched 2 Magnum PIs last night on DVD from Netflix. So.
Excellent. Sounds good. Yeah. So there's lots of stuff going on at the moment that. We could definitely talk about. One of the big things that's come up in the open source world and in the tech world in general in the last 6 months to a year is the sale of Novell to Attachmate, who people. I mean, I didn't know anything about Attachmate before this. I don't know whether you did, but they certainly kind of came out of the blue to me anyway, although they have been around for quite a while, and there's lots of stuff going on there. Obviously, Novell, not an inconsiderably sized company, and there's lots of concern over what's going to happen with lots of employees who are there. And we had some news coming out of Novell this week, or sorry, out of Attachmate, I should say, that after coming out and saying that business would continue as usual for Novell, they then turned around and sacked something like 800 employees worldwide, and including the guys who work on Mono. And just in case anyone doesn't know, Mono is a free open source implementation of the Microsoft .NET framework, which some of you will probably know if you're developers, or you've been involved in that kind of thing. Been around a long time, very popular. The C# language is also very popular, and Miguel de Casa and some of the other great people who work at Novell have been making an implementation for other systems, so it runs on things like not only Linux, it runs on other Unix-like systems, and also things like the iPhone. They were targeting the iPhone and Android and other things as well. And the big news is this week that they've basically, as far as we can see, they've all been kind of given their marching orders, which seems a little sad to me.
Yeah, definitely. Now, they can still fork this. I mean, it was an open source program, right? I mean, somebody can fork this. Somebody else could pick up and hire these developers, right, and continue the effort.
Yeah, it's under the GPL v2, I think, GPL v2 Mono. So it's most certainly open source, free software, all of that kind of stuff. I think we had Miguel on our show, must be a year or two ago now, on Linux Outlaws. And when we talked to him then, he was the vice president for development, I think, at Novell. So he was fairly high up. I believe he's still there, but he's still actually employed at the company at the moment, but not working on Mono anymore, which is a little sad. And there's been some strange reaction to this in the community, because Mono has been controversial because of its stemming from Microsoft's .NET and the worries about patents and other threats that could be on that. I mean, it's fairly certain that Microsoft will have a lot of patents on .NET. That would make sense, and C#, which is the language, one of the popular languages in it, and so on. So lots of people have traditionally been against Mono in the free software community, and it was quite sad to see a few people kind of cheering as as Mono got axed, or some of the Mono developers got axed. And a good friend of mine, Bradley Kuhn from the Software Freedom Conservancy, wrote an excellent blog post on this. I'll give you the link to put in the show notes, where he was saying that basically it's not a victory for free software, because the danger is that these people will, will get other jobs working on proprietary software, which is a loss to the open source free software world. So we'd like to keep these people involved, and some great developers there. And there's lots of key apps as well in Mono, which is interesting. Banshee, I don't know if you've used Banshee. That's a very, very popular media player on the Linux desktop, and it's also available on the Mac and other platforms, I believe. That's very, very popular, and it's all Mono based. It was developed by Aaron Bockover, who then went to work for Novell and worked on it more for them. Who's just recently left Novell. And lots of people are worried about that, because Banshee has become the default media player in the Linux desktop. Ubuntu recently moved to it. Lots of other people have moved to it, and now there's this kind of uncertainty over it. But again, it's under a GPL license, so it could be forked, as you say. So it may not be the end of it. It's just it's a little sad that the kind of the sponsorship that was behind it has filtered away a bit.
Right. I know a while back there was high hopes that Mono would run Silverlight. That Mono, and in fact, Mono did run, I think, Silverlight 1.0, but I don't think it moved to 2.0, if I remember correctly. Maybe it did. Chat room can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that there was some hopes there in getting things like Netflix actually running on Linux if Mono would be able to implement Silverlight, because that's what is required for Netflix, for example. To work properly is Silverlight 2. So I know there was some big hopes there as well. Yeah, and like you say, the license thing is, I think, the most interesting part of this, because Microsoft had those deals with Novell, which is quite frankly why I stopped running SUSE at all. When that happened, I swore off SUSE. Again, maybe that was unfortunate, but I just didn't want to support deals like that with proprietary software. But regardless, I think it's going to be interesting. Let's say another company picked this up. Let's say Google or some other company picked this up. If they did not have those agreements, if those agreements did not carry over, those licensing agreements did not carry over, I think it would make it very hard for anyone to want to continue to develop Mono. Just in light of the fact that Microsoft may come back down the line sometime and sue them out of existence.
Yeah, excuse me. And the other thing which I'm not very clear on, I should another disclaimer. I should say I know nothing. Not only am I not Randall Schwartz, I'm also not a lawyer, and I don't know the law, particularly in the US. But I think also there's trademark issues as well. I don't know if Mono is trademarked to Novell, which is a separate issue, which we were actually going to kind of get onto a bit later when we talk about LibreOffice and OpenOffice and so on. I don't know whether the trademark Mono is property of Novell, and Moonlight as well, which is the Silverlight equivalent that you were talking about there. They were working on Moonlight and certain other things, and yeah, it's all very, very strange. I find it really interesting that they came out and said only very recently, Attachmate came out and said business as usual for Novell, nothing to see here, move along, and then promptly went and changed everything. So I don't know, it's an interesting PR move, but they've moved SUSE, as I'm sure you will know, Aaron, is traditionally a German distribution. It was developed in Nuremberg in Germany, and it was bought by Novell in the early 2000s, so mid 2000s, and basically the deal is that Attachmate are planning to spin off the SUSE Linux business as a separate business again, and they've switched base from the US back to Germany again. So it's going to be a separate company, very much based in Germany again, and a lot of the core developers of SUSE and OpenSUSE and so on are still based in Germany, so that kind of makes sense for them to do that. But it's certainly a traumatic time for a lot of people who are involved in that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of people who work at Novell who are very important as well. I would say anyway in the Linux and free software world. We have people like Greg Crow-Hartman, who's the maintainer of the Linux kernel staging tree. Yep. We have James Bottomley, who looks after the SCSI subsystems and other things in the Linux kernel. He's a maintainer there, a very important guy. And then I don't want to upset anyone by not naming them, but there's numerous important engineers there for Linux and wider open source kind of software. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with that. I would imagine most of them won't have any trouble finding an alternative employer, as you say, but who knows?
Right, right. Also, you know, Novell, we talked about the licensing issues with Mono, but I mean, Novell holds several licenses that are incredibly important to the Linux community in general, right? I believe they hold the rights to Unix, right, which was a big deal a few years ago with SCO and everything. So, you know, I think it is really important that what happens to all of Novell's holdings, as it were, is incredibly important for the Linux community, and I hope that Attachmate makes wise use of those instead of you know, just letting them go like they seem to be doing with Mono. So, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. No, I was just going to say it's obviously a big important thing that's going on, and Novell have got, as you mentioned, the Unix copyright trademark, I should say, which was a big deal in previous years when we had people like SCO and other, you know, other people trying to assert that they owned the Unix copyright and that in some way Linux was in violation of that. A lot of people that I know who kind of had involvement with the legal, you know, the legal cases and so on, are not too worried about the acquisition of Novell by Attachmate, because they say that that the case, SCO's case, fell down because they were never able to prove that Linux is Unix or that there's any code from Unix in Linux, because all of the Linux developers and so on would I'm sure say that the code is their own and they never copied anything from Unix. While they may have been inspired by Unix, they didn't actually copy any code. So therefore, I think SCO's case fell down on that. So fingers crossed that will keep us safe, but you can never be too sure.
Right. Right. Well, there's certainly been similar things that have happened in history when acquisitions happen. One example of that is actually Oracle's acquisition of Sun. Before we jump into the next topic, I have to say that the following opinions are my own and do not represent the opinions of Oracle or any of its partners. Because I do work for Oracle, but we're going to talk about some things now that are related to Oracle, and just suffice it to say I'm not a company spokesman. So everything that we talk about is my own opinion from here on out in terms of as it relates to Oracle. But Oracle bought Sun and a while back, and there's been quite a bit of worrying going on in the open source community about what it would do with the many holdings of that came from Sun. Sun was the largest contributor to open source software prior to the acquisition. They probably still are in terms of lines of code, just because nobody else has caught up yet. But there's a lot of software there. One example of that, of course, is OpenOffice. And recently, Oracle decided that it was not going to continue OpenOffice, at least the commercial development of the OpenOffice suite, and basically handed things over to LibreOffice. You know, there was a fork there. Again, the folks that were in the OpenOffice community weren't happy with Oracle running that particular software package. They forked it, and I think the community came out in a big way to support them. You know, when you think about it, it's not really in Oracle's the way that they do things typically is not aligned with the way that OpenOffice worked. OpenOffice was free, as in beer, as well as in freedom. So it was free on both standpoints. They did have some support contracts, I guess, but Oracle doesn't typically give away software. It's not really in their nature to give away software. So this was kind of something that was a little bit at odds with the way that Oracle does business. And so, you know what, I think it's good. I think it's good that that LibreOffice doesn't necessarily have to compete with OpenOffice anymore. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really emotive issue for a lot of people, and it's one I find a little sad in some ways. I mean, one of the big questions has been whether I mentioned trademarks before in relation to Mono and Novell. The OpenOffice.org, which is the full name of the software, OOO, is trademarked to, well, was trademarked to Sun, now obviously owned by Oracle. And the reason for the renaming to LibreOffice is because obviously they don't own the name OpenOffice. And I know one of the things that the Document Foundation and the people who broke away, if you like, and kind of fought the project. What I'm hoping is that they will be able to kind of reclaim the OpenOffice name in some way in future, that Oracle may deem it, a good idea to kind of assign that over to them. I'm not sure that they will. Maybe this will affect that. If Oracle have decided they don't have an interest in OpenOffice, then maybe they will relinquish the name back. Because that's it sounds like such a petty thing, but that's one of the things I think is really important, because OpenOffice it's one of people don't like me saying this, but it's one of the kind of the gateway drugs, I would say, of open source. It's not, I don't want to make that analogy too closely, but you know what I mean. It's it's like Firefox. It's the sort of thing that people who don't know anything about open source software, never seen it, never heard of it, may use along with things like VLC and, as I say, Firefox and so on. And they may end up using it and get to like it. And the sad thing is that none of those people will really realize that LibreOffice is a continuation of OpenOffice. They'll think there's another thing come out, and where's OpenOffice gone? And there's a whole branding issue there, I think. OpenOffice has become a very strong brand. So I think that, that's certainly important. But I think LibreOffice is looking promising. I've been doing a bit of reading up on this today, and it seems that the Document Foundation, there was a group of German developers who were working on OpenOffice in the OpenOffice.org community, who originally kind of moved away and started to set up the Document Foundation. And I believe through my research that it was actually Sun's intention when they when they very graciously open sourced OpenOffice back in the early 2000s or so on, like 10 years ago or more, that they hoped eventually that it would be under the control of a foundation rather than a corporation. And there was lots of talk about the OpenOffice Foundation. So now we have a foundation in the Document Foundation, which is independent, and they're actually hoping that it will increase corporate input, because competitors won't have to feel that they're improving. If it was owned by, say, Sun, it would be harder for another company to justify putting code into it, while they might think they're improving their competitor's product and so on. There's a bit of an ideological thing going on there, so there's that as well. And I think it's very important that it keeps going. There are some new features in LibreOffice 3.3, I think is the latest version. There are some new features in there that aren't in previous versions of OpenOffice, so I think it is kind of moving forward, which is great to see.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting in the case of OpenOffice. It's actually, although I don't know the first one was a fork, but it's actually it had multiple iterations in its past. I mean, the code originally came from the StarOffice program, which Sun acquired back in the day. I can't remember what year it was, but I remember when Sun acquired that, and then agreed to have this other version called OpenOffice. The community wanted it. I don't know all the history. I'll say that up front, but I do remember. First it was StarOffice, and then OpenOffice, and StarOffice kind of Sun. Even while I was at Sun over the past few years, Sun actually was kind of, while they were contributing code to OpenOffice, they were also had a different branch back into StarOffice. We were still using StarOffice for a long time. And then pretty much everything just went OpenOffice, and then of course Oracle took over. So it's just interesting, the various iterations, and it does speak to the power of open source software and having it available in case something happens to fork. I mean, it's the power of the license, the open source license that's involved is just for this reason. If you want to, or you feel like you need to, you can take the code and do what you want with it. So it really speaks to the power of the open source license in this case.
Yeah, it definitely does. And one of the interesting things I found when I was researching this earlier is that one of the things they've just brought in version 3.3 is improved support for importing WordPerfect files. And I thought to myself, does anybody still use WordPerfect? Am I out of touch with the rest of the world? I thought WordPerfect had kind of been phased out a long time ago. I don't know, maybe I'm not that I have anything against it, I have nothing against it. It's just that I didn't think anybody still used it, but apparently there are still people out there who really want to open their WordPerfect documents.
Well, I still have not. I still have WordPerfect documents that I have not converted over to any other format. I don't know why. One of my original resumes and cover letters are still in WordPerfect. So I've got those files sitting in my documents folder. At home. They're still there, and for whatever reason I just haven't saved them in anything else. I don't even really need to keep them, but every once in a while, just for nostalgia purposes, I like to go back and read them and laugh at myself at my resume back from when I just graduated from college, how silly it looked. but I still have those files. So, you know, the WordPerfect, again, it's the power of open source, is being able to do that, having the code available to go back. And even if OpenOffice or LibreOffice now doesn't continue to support WordPerfect, you can always go back and grab the source code when it did and open those files and read them. It's one of the things that we used to talk about at Sun quite a bit, is movies, you know, or pictures. You know, I save a picture today in a format that works today. 20 years from now, no one may have heard of that format anymore. They don't know what it is. But I can always go back and get open source code, compile it, run it, open those files, view my pictures, whatever, and it'll still work. So longevity and archiving is a real good thing when it comes to open source software. All right, let's move on to one more story, and then we'll get into talking about your Ubuntu experience, because I'm really keen. I just downloaded the ISO yesterday, and I want to try it out. But I want to hear about your experiences, and maybe I'll get to that this afternoon. So before we talk about that, real quickly, let's talk about something open source, at least community related, although not open source directly, and that is that you know, some fairly breaking news here, I guess, for this show, which is that Microsoft is buying Skype for $8.5 billion. That's billion with a B. And I was kind of shocked at this. My first thought was that, again, this comes down to at a personal level. You know, Oracle bought Sun with all of its software and hardware, you know, came along with it for about $7 billion. And now here, Microsoft, in its biggest acquisition ever, is buying Skype for $8.5 billion. And I'm a little worried, because we do use Skype, for example, for this show and all the shows on the Twit network. We use Skype because it's, you know, easy to use, and everyone pretty much has it available to them. And I'm kind of worried now that people that aren't running a Windows operating system or otherwise won't be able to run Skype anymore. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, it's a major concern. It's something that that I've been hearing a lot today, and in the last since yesterday when the news broke. Lots of people wondering if there'll still be a Linux version of Skype, and you know, obviously a Mac version and other things as well. I kind of, my personal opinion, and well, I don't have to worry about disclaiming the fact this isn't my employer's opinion, but there we go. My personal opinion on this is that I think certainly the Apple version of Skype will not go anywhere, because it's so important to Microsoft. They can't get rid of it. I mean, the reason that they have Microsoft Office available on the Mac is because there's a market for it. And it's obviously going to be the same for Skype. I would hope that they will keep the Linux version going, because I believe there's a strong market for that as well, because so many people have netbooks and things these days with Ubuntu or whatever it might be on it that they would probably want to use to Skype their granny or whatever it might be. That I would hope they would keep that going and not kind of get rid of it just for, you know, ideological reasons. But I suppose we'll see. As you said, this isn't open source software in any way, Skype, and I suppose this is kind of slightly outside of the bounds of what we normally talk about. But as you said, we're talking via Skype right now, so it's definitely going to have an impact on us. I was interested to read that Steve Ballmer apparently who's the CEO of Microsoft, has been personally pushing this deal as his baby, if you like. I found that quite interesting. So I don't know exactly how it's going to benefit Microsoft, but I think, you know, if they wanted a VoIP solution, then this is probably the one to look at. But the strange thing I found is that eBay bought Skype all those years ago for, I think it was 1-point-something billion, which at the time we all kind of balked at and said, oh, that's, you know, what an incredible amount of money. And eBay never really worked out what to do with it. As far as I could see, the only use they had for it was a button on the item listings on their auctions, which would say, you know, Skype the seller, and you could click a button and it would Skype the seller. I don't think they really had any other use for it. So I'm interested to see what Microsoft are going to do with it and what their intentions are. You know, I don't think that, you know, they won't have bought it just for the sake of buying it. So I'm interested to see what their strategy is going forward.
Yeah, and I'm curious also. I think that the founders of Skype doubled down on this, right? Because I mean, they got pretty big profit when eBay bought I guess just the use really of Skype, not necessarily the licenses and technology behind it. But then it's also reported that they took home another $1.2 billion. Nicholas Zenstrom and Janice Fries, the two co-founders, took home about $1.2 billion just from this sale. So, what do you do? I mean, I can't imagine how these guys are feeling right now. It's just like, they get to double dip basically on selling this thing twice. So
yeah,
good news
incredibly
for them.
clever, I would say. However they did it, I don't know, but I believe at the time eBay didn't realize that they hadn't bought the rights to Skype as well. They'd basically bought a license from what it turns out these days. I think they basically bought a license to use Skype, which is interesting because they thought they'd bought the technology, and very, very clever move by the founders of Skype.
Yeah, and it's interesting too how this could impact. Of course, there's no plans have been announced. There's nothing set in stone with this acquisition, but it's interesting how this could impact the mobile phone market, for example. So this is again where it kind of comes back around to competing with free software. Google hasn't really fully integrated Google Voice with Android yet. You can use Google Voice on Android, but you can use it to make phone calls, but not necessarily voice over IP calls. So in other words, you can get Google Voice to call your phone and then make the connection with the other phone. That all works great. But it hasn't really fully integrated voice over IP. And of course, Skype has been heavily targeting the cell phone markets as a way to get people to save their minutes, right? So use Skype and use your Wi-Fi connection to talk to people instead of using your minutes on your cell phone. And now, so the question is, what's going to happen? What's going to happen with the iPhone? What's going to happen with Android devices? Is this going to be a Windows Phone only service? Are they going to integrate it with Windows Phone somehow? And will this kind of force Google's hand into, fully implementing a voice over IP service? That was one of the things I first thought of is, oh man, Gizmo just went away and now Skype was bought by Microsoft, So in terms of competitors, I think this is really interesting. Will this kind of force Google's hand into getting a little bit more aggressive now that there isn't kind of a common third party to use? The other thing that I thought was really interesting about this in terms of the market is that Facebook, Microsoft has invested quite heavily at the beginning in Facebook when people thought they were stupid for, quite frankly, for investing in Facebook back in the day. I think they had $300 million or something like that comes to mind. I can't remember exactly how much it was. But Microsoft is an investor in, sorry, I think it was, maybe it was $300 million. Anyway, so now the question is, can Facebook pick up the Skype technology? Do they have rights to do so? I don't know. Can they work that out with Microsoft, pick up the Skype technology and add it as a feature in Facebook, which would be huge, right? I think I heard Skype had something like 170 million users, which is really big, but Facebook has 600 million. And so if Facebook were to pick this up and integrate it into their software, it would be a huge win for Facebook. So I'm kind of curious to see what happens in terms of partnerships with other companies and what's going to, I think it's going to, it's definitely going to be a fork in the road, not necessarily a fork in terms of software like we were talking before, but a fork in the road when it comes to voice over IP software.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. As you said, if there's the Facebook chat, which a lot of people use, and if they were to have a call button on that as well, it could be huge. It could be a massive thing. It's going to be interesting to see. I think you're right. There's a lack of alternatives right now, which is a shame. As you say, Gizmo's kind of going away. There is, I'll be shot if I don't mention this by all of the free software and open source people that I know. There is, of course, SIP, which is a completely open protocol. And there are lots of SIP clients that you can use. And there's things like Asterisk, which is a great PBX and voice over IP type server and so on. So I'll be interested to see how much interest in Asterisk and things like that goes up in the wake of this. It could actually, in some ways, be a good thing for them.
Right. Okay, so on to Ubuntu. There's still a couple more things we want to talk about before we wrap up today. On to Ubuntu. How is Ubuntu going? Now, obviously, Ubuntu, just to kind of set this up, Ubuntu came out with their latest version of their operating system, Natty Narwhal. I believe it is. Back in a few weeks ago, they came out with this latest version of Ubuntu, and there's some couple interesting developments that they made here. One is the user interface itself, which they've gone away from GNOME to a user interface called Unity. And I talked about this a little bit with the CEO of Ubuntu back at Scale. you know, and whether she thought this would be, you know, is this going to be a huge deal? Is it going to be a problem? Are people going to love it? Of course, her answer was, oh, people are going to love it. It's great. But what do you think? Have you actually used it, Dan? Sounds like you have.
I have, yeah. I don't know if you're going to be able to see, but I'm going to try and hold it up to the camera. You probably won't be able to see the screen very well, but this is a netbook I've got, which is running the Unity desktop. And oh, I'm opening all kinds of pages there by accident. It's very, very different. It's something that Canonical, I should say, just for anyone who doesn't know, are the company behind Ubuntu Linux, and they've been developing this. And it's a real kind of shift in the UI. It's all based now around what they're calling the dashboard, which is down the left-hand side. It's kind of like a dock, if you like, all of your apps that are open and all of your favorite shortcuts, things like file and folder searches and so on, are in this this dashboard, which is on the left-hand side. And it has a few problems for me anyway, in that being a kind of a dock, it tries to hide itself when you go full screen with a program. And sometimes when you're just trying to scroll down a page or just do something, it'll pop up when you don't really want it to. Unfortunately. But I have to say, I'm very impressed with how far they've come, considering a year ago, Unity didn't really exist at all. It's quite a major shift away, and everything, everything that they've done has been very impressive. I do actually quite like some of the features they've got. Like, I'll attempt to show you this. Here we go. Don't know if you can see. You get these big desktop icons on there. It's very much a simplified, a more simplified interface, and you can search and filter. You start typing the name of the application that you want to use, and then it will filter through. Same for files and folders and email, stuff like that, which is quite interesting. I think in terms of usability, it's going to be a big change. If you haven't used a computer before, if that makes any sense. If you haven't used, if anybody listens to this hasn't used a computer, you know what I mean. If you have friends or family or relatives, whoever, who aren't particularly invested in, say, the Windows UI or the Mac UI or whatever, then they would probably find this a lot easier to get to grips with. In that, in that it's very different, and they wouldn't have to relearn all of the things that they thought they'd learn. And it is very interesting. One of the major concerns for me in this, which I've expressed to a few of the Ubuntu developers, and I think to give them credit, they are kind of taking this in mind, is the lack of accessibility features at the moment. It's very much taken a back seat. By accessibility, I mean things like screen readers, magnification, things for sight-impaired users, or any kind of disabled users. Within GNOME, which was the main desktop before, GNOME is still there underneath, but it's kind of hidden away. And when you click on the files and folders link, it will occasionally bring up a Nautilus GNOME file manager thing, so you can kind of tell it's still there.
Right, and that's kind of one of the things I wanted to clarify, because people say, "Oh, GNOME is gone, GNOME is gone," but it's really not gone. It's just the user interface that's on top of GNOME. The GNOME user interface is changed. But GNOME, all the underlying applications and programs and glue that tie it all together, that's still there, right?
Yeah, I mean, the libraries and everything else are still there underneath. Yeah, as you say, I think it's all essentially just like a facade in front of the GNOME desktop, is how I would describe it. It's kind of like it's sat on top of your GNOME desktop. Unfortunately, there's no easy way to get back. If you decide that, if you install, it's a bold decision in that if you install Ubuntu 11.04 and you can't stand Unity, there's no easy way to go back to GNOME. They haven't put that in. I think consciously, because they want people to use Unity, which is quite a brave decision, because if there are lots of users who prefer the traditional GNOME 2 desktop, then they're going to feel a little left out to dry. I believe recently Canonical came out and announced that they would make a route back to GNOME for people who want it. So that's quite a major change of heart for them. So it could be interesting. But yeah, the other thing is GNOME 3 is also on the horizon. The GNOME desktop that we kind of know and use now, most of us anyway, is GNOME 2, which has been around a long time. And GNOME 3 has been on the horizon for quite a while. Distributions like Fedora, the new Fedora, which is coming out soon, Fedora 15, that ships with GNOME 3 desktop. And GNOME 3 is much more like Like Unity, it's got a dashboard, it's got all these other things going on. I haven't used it much. I need to kind of get into that, but yeah, it's very much a shift in the desktop. I think in some ways it's going to be a brilliant idea. In hindsight, we'll know how it works out, obviously, but it could either be a genius move in that it's different to everything else, or it could be a terrible move in that people say it's different to everything else. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I don't want to know. So I think we'll find out as time goes on.
Right, right. Okay, so we're almost out of time. I guess we didn't have to worry about what to talk about today. One other thing I wanted to bring up is Google I/O, which is happening right now in San Francisco, which is, of course, the conference that talks about kind of a developer conference for Google, all the Google software applications, and especially Android and things like that. I don't know if you had time to catch the keynote yesterday. I watched it because I was kind of curious as to what, if anything, they would announce. They actually had some pretty big announcements. And because Android actually is open source software, I want to talk about some of them. One of them in particular is the ability to run, to have Android operate, or at least in Honeycomb, which pretty much means tablets, but I believe this is going to be rolled out going forward, is to have Android operate as a USB host. And what this means is that you can plug in game controllers, you can plug in theoretically printers, anything that any endpoint, keyboards, things like that you would typically plug into your computer via USB to make them work. You'll now be able to plug into Android. Now obviously not everything will be supported, but in my mind, I don't know if this is accurate or not because I haven't talked to anybody since the keynote yesterday. But in my mind, this is all enabled by the Linux kernel. Because the Linux kernel, typically, I know Android runs a stripped down Linux kernel, but the Linux kernel has these drivers built into it. So, and especially for older type accessories, I always recommend, like for example, I've got a scanner. It's a Canon scanner, and when Windows 7 came out, it didn't recognize the scanner anymore. There was no Windows drivers for it. So every time I go to run this scanner, of course, I'm running in Linux because Linux has these drivers for this scanner. And they're still in the Linux kernel, and there's no reason that they should ever take them out. So, so in terms of comparing operating systems, Windows and Linux, the whole reason that Android can do this, theoretically anyway, like I said, I have no proof, but because these drivers are already in Linux, all they have to do is expand the Linux kernel to include these drivers, and they have support for thousands and thousands of these hardware devices. So. I thought that was very interesting news. That's something that they could have done a long time ago if they wanted to, but of course it does bring up certain support issues. Like I said, things may not work properly. Certain drivers for certain peripherals are not supported in Linux because no one's just taking the time to go out and write a driver or get a driver for them. So not everything seemingly will work, but it also expands the whole platform dramatically when you compare it to something like an Apple iPhone or iPad. Which does not allow you to plug third-party devices unless they're officially supported through the Apple interface, the Apple proprietary interface. It doesn't allow you to plug those peripherals in, and now you can do that with Android. At least you can try. You can have a better camera. They were showing off yesterday the ability to. This is another thing that they announced, which is I forget what they call it, but the ability to have interoperate with external devices. Via a special platform. I forget what they call it. I should look it up. But basically, what was it? Android at Home? No, not Android at Home. It was the other one that they had, the Arduino.
Right, the ADK.
Yeah, ADK. I forget what they call it. But anyway, so they announced the ability to interoperate with this thing called the ADK, and they demonstrated this by having some guy get on a treadmill or a exercise bike, right? And he would connect via USB cable to this exercise bike, and he would actually program what he wanted to do on his phone. And when he plugged in the phone, the exercise bike would start, and he would actually play a game on his phone along with his exercise routine. That the faster he would pedal, he would make a little Android guy go up and down and through a maze or whatever. So I thought that was really interesting too. And again, the fact that they were using Arduino. An Arduino board as the reference device for to make this thing work. Again, open source, talking about open source hardware now, was really, really interesting. So those two things specifically I thought were probably the most interesting to me in terms of open source, in terms of how they were making this work. Did you catch any of those developments by any chance?
I didn't actually. I mean, I saw a little bit of it, but I'm not as fully up on it. But what I find interesting about the whole USB host thing is it seems like a clear move towards more of a desktop OS, if you like, because my phone runs out of power most of the time as it is anyway now, my Android phone. So I can't imagine that I'm going to want to plug many devices into that and, like, you know, charge them or power them off my phone because the battery's already quite taxed. But I do find it interesting that maybe it's a sign that Android is going to move more towards a full. We've got tablets which are on the horizon. I mean, there's lots of Android tablets coming out now, but maybe even a move to a more full desktop OS, if you like, which could be really interesting in future.
Right, absolutely. And they said that these, a lot of these enhancements were also being added, especially the host I/O part, to Google TV, for example, which brings up a whole load of possibilities for me in terms of gaming. You know, the fact that I could possibly, with the next generation of Google TV devices, use it as a gaming console as well, just on my TV or my device that's connected to my TV. If I can hook up a little gaming console and play games right on the TV, then that actually increases the likelihood that I would buy one of those devices anyway, because now I've got functionality that's kind of all tied together. I don't have to go to multiple devices to access that. So anyway, pretty interesting stuff going on in terms of Google I/O. Okay, I think that about wraps it up. Anything that I'm forgetting, Dan? We've got a couple minutes left.
Yeah, I mean, very quickly, just reacting to some of the chat in the chat room there. People were just mentioning the fact that when I was talking about GNOME 3 and the desktop, I said it wasn't released yet. Technically, the GNOME 3 is actually released, but no major Linux distributions have come out with it yet. I think Fedora is going to be the first one. So just I don't want to mislead people on that point. And people are also pointing out you can get GNOME 3 on your current, if you've got a Linux desktop or whatever, you can get yourself a copy of GNOME 3 and install it. But if you're really interested to try it out, best thing to do is probably get yourself a live CD. They've got two, there's an OpenSUSE and a Fedora live CD. There's two options on the website there. If you Google for GNOME 3 or you use a search engine of your choice, then you will find them there. And I think that, that's pretty much covers it. I just wanted to clear that up.
Okay, great. And so I guess that about wraps it up here. Before we go, we should also tell people what's coming up next. Dan, I know you've been working on that in terms of what's coming up next on Floss Weekly on future episodes. So what have we got?
Yeah, next week I've arranged an interview with Sam Spilsbury, who works on Compiz, which is the 3D window manager. It's been around a long time now. I've been using Compiz since about 2006, I think. And he's at the Ubuntu Developers Summit, which is happening right now in Budapest, in Hungary. And he's there at the moment kind of talking to them. And what I'm really interested in is the fact that we've talked about this already with Unity and so on, and GNOME 3 coming on board, that people seem to be moving away from Compiz because they want, their 3D effects and stuff is already built into things like GNOME 3 and Unity and so on. So I'm really interested to know what he's doing at UDS and how it's going to happen going forward. So we've got him coming up next week. It's going to be really interesting. I haven't actually looked at the rest of the guest list, so I have to apologize. But I think Randall's going to be back next week for that one as well. So that should be really interesting. Okay, great. That'll be exciting. Randall is coming back. He's just been gone for a few weeks. So if you're really missing Randall on Floss, don't worry. He will be back reporting from some high building or some strange place, I'm sure. So, so just as a reminder, if you want to find out more about what I'm working on and what I'm doing, you can go to thesourceshow.org, which is my other podcast that I do very infrequently these days. But I am working on stuff. As I mentioned at the top of the show, I'll be down at Maker Faire, recording some things there. So if you can't make it, you can always tune into my podcast to find out what the most interesting things are at Maker Faire. And you can also go to Aaron Newcomb on Twitter, Aaron Newcomb on Facebook, or AaronNewcomb.com for kind of a combination of all those sites, find out what's going on so you can keep track of what I'm doing there. Dan, where can people find out what you're up to? Yeah, I mean, obviously there's Linux Outlaws. I'm wearing the proudly sporting the T-shirt today, which is a weekly Linux podcast about Linux and also other open source and free software. You can find that at linuxoutlaws.com, if I can say it properly. You can also check out all the stuff I'm doing, various other podcasts and music and all kinds of stuff at danlynch.org. and you can find links to Twitter and Identica and all those kind of things on there. And one thing I was very quickly going to mention as well is we're doing another OG camp, which is I'm trying to think of a good way to describe it. It's our kind of free software, open source, and also free culture and wider community type event. It's the 3rd year we're running it, and we're having a much bigger venue this year. We've got some really exciting sponsors that we're going to talk about soon. Tickets have been flying out the door. We had 300 taken in the first couple of weeks, which is great. So we're actually going to get more tickets soon. But for anybody who's in the UK, if you want to find out more about it, you can go to ogcamp.org, which is OGG.camp.org, and find out more. Keep an eye on it, find out more tickets. It's going to be on the 13th and 14th of August, and it's in Farnham Maltings, which is a former brewery, I believe, or a distillery, I should say, maltings and so on. So very interesting. It's going to be near London in the UK, so it should be hopefully very easy to get to. So if you want to find out more about that, head over to ogcamp.org. And I think that's all of my various plugs for now.
Well, it sounds like you're busy, and definitely if you're in the UK, definitely check out that conference. It sounds like a lot of fun. I wish I could be there, but I don't think I'm going to have time to fly over right now. So anyway, all right, thanks for hosting with me today, Dan. I really appreciate it. Randall, again, as I said, will be back next week. And until then, thanks for joining us on Floss Weekly.